But I really would like to give you this movie review. Okay, I really would like to give you this movie review as a testimony to what I just said to you. Number one, there's no way you will ever embrace the truth of doctrine enough, at least enough to get you into heaven, if you are not embracing the truth of the moral state of yourself, your loved ones, and your society. The name of this movie is TESS of the Dubervilles. TESS of the Dubervilles. Just 1 second, brother. I'm getting all riled up because it's warm in here. Hold on. I'm not going to take too much time with this movie, but it's called TESS of the Dubervilles. It took place in medieval England, and it was about a poor family. A poor family. There were a lot of poor people in those days, with multiple children, many children, and they were living off of the land. And the father discovered that his name, the family name, which was something, it was something similar to Duberville, not Duberville, but it sounded like Duberville. There was a wealthy family named Duberville, and this poor family had a name that was similar to Duberville. And the father discovered that they really were poor relatives of the rich Dubervilles. So he sent his young daughter, I think she was only 14 years old, beautiful young girl. He sent her to the plantation or the farm of the wealthy Dubervilles, hoping that they would get some help. And there was a young man, a young cousin there, young male cousin who was smitten with her. And there was no indication in the movie that he wanted to marry her, but he definitely did want to sleep with her. And she resisted him, but her parents really wanted her on that farm. They wanted her there, so they were like throwing her into the lion's mouth. And she was just a young girl, and he was very persuasive, and she yielded to him. So she was a virgin. And after a couple of weeks of sleeping with him, she decided that she really didn't like him and she couldn't continue on with it. And she left. She went back to her poor parents. She was working in the fields and found out that she was pregnant. She didn't tell him that she was. The man would have. He definitely would have taken care of the. It came out in the movie later on. He definitely would have taken care of the child. And as far as money went, he really wanted to take care of her. She just didn't like him. She had the child, and the child died. It probably would not have died if she had had money. So the family's still poor, and she leaves town. She goes to another because she's looked down upon in that town. The clergyman would not baptize the child, and then the child died. So she baptized the child herself. She was this really, really naive, really heart-wrenching young person. And she went to the pastor and said, I baptized the child myself. And the pastor asked her what she did, and she went through every step. And he said, that's right, so the child's baptized. Of course, they're worried about the child going to hell. And she said, okay, pastor, will you now bury him in the church graveyard? And the pastor would not bury him in the church graveyard. And her heart was broken. And she said, I don't understand why the child was baptized properly. Why won't you bury him in the church graveyard? And the pastor said, well, I have to answer to the people. The people don't know that I've agreed that the church is, that the child is baptized. They don't have to know that because they would object to that. But I cannot bury her in the church graveyard, and where the people would object to it. So the girl's devastated. Excuse me. She goes away into another town and makes another life for herself where nobody knows about her past. And she falls in love with this young man. They fall in love with each other. And she tries to, and he wants to marry her, and she tries to tell him about her past, and she cannot tell him face to face, so she puts a note under his door, and then something happens, and he didn't see the note, and at that point she thought it was fate, and she destroyed the note, and she married him without telling him the full truth. In addition to this, no one's going to like this story. Okay, no one's going to like this story, but I'm telling you what God told me a couple of days after I saw the movie, which absolutely blew me away. So the young man, his parents didn't want him to marry her. I don't know that they had any really legitimate reasons. They just thought he should marry someone else. So, Sheila, are you telling me that your parents have to choose the one that you marry? I'm not telling you anything. And I didn't tell you this is a true story. It's a true story. Okay. So at least it took place at a time, and his parents were honorable people. I don't know what the answer is because everyone doesn't have honorable parents. I don't know about that. I'm just telling you this true story. His parents were honorable. They didn't think he should marry this girl. At the very least, he was marrying based on intense emotions. Brethren, we all hope that when you get married that you will love each other, but you cannot get married based on emotions only. Did his parents have legitimate objections to her? I'm not really sure. I would have to watch the movie again. To be honest with you, I think I was dozing through the movie, so I honestly don't know. And to me, it was just a light movie that I was watching. But he did it against his parents' will. But the parents went along with it, but they were not happy. Okay. Then on the night of the wedding, he says to her, the groom says to the bride, I have a confession to make. I didn't tell you because I was afraid I would lose you. I had an indiscreet relationship with a woman I was not married to, obviously not married to. And it lasted 2 weeks, and I didn't tell you because I was afraid I would lose you. And she said, Oh, of course I forgive you. And I too have a confession. And she tells him what happened, that she had the child, and the child died. Well, the man could not take the victory. He leaves her. He leaves her, completely abandons her. He says, Where will you go? She says, I'll go back to my parents. So she went back to the poverty of her parents, and he went to Brazil. And he actually asked another woman if she would go to Brazil with him without being married. So well, let me say this first. He told her, The reason I'm leaving you is because, not only because of what you did, but because you didn't tell me, because this shows that there's a moral lack in you. Now, we're talking about morals now, right? We're talking about recognizing moral deficiency. We're talking about being honest about moral deficiency. And he said to her in so many words, Well, I did that one thing with that woman, but I declared it to you, and my family is moral and upstanding, and obviously this means that your family is not of the character of my family, and I can't live with you. And she said, Well, you can divorce me. And he says, Divorce? No, that would be a scandal. No divorce. No divorce. Okay. I'm just going to go to Brazil and abandon you. So she goes back to her family and starts working in the fields again. And he goes off to Brazil, and it shows you that he's considering taking a woman with him that's not his wife. Okay. So he's looking at her, but he can't look at himself. Then things go very bad for her. The father dies. The family is on the street. Her mother with like 3 or 4 other very young children. In the meantime, the man who was the father of her child, her cousin, comes looking for her. He still wants her. He still wants her. I don't know if he was willing to marry her, but he's certainly willing to live with her and even take care of her, even if she didn't live with him. And he said to her, You were really wrong not telling me about the child. And your mother just told me what you should have told me. Years ago, it was my child too. You should have told me. And she just wanted nothing to do with this man. There was nothing in the movie that I could see that he was doing that was really wrong. She just didn't like him. I don't believe that he hit her or was cruel to her. He wanted to take care of her. She just didn't like him. And then when the family and her mother and the children are on the street, apparently she decided to go live with him. And she was calling herself by his name, Mrs. Duberville. I don't know whether They got married. I don't know what happened there, but they were living together as man and wife. And her husband, I left out the most important thing. What her husband said to her on the night that he abandoned her, he said to her, I can't stay with you because while that other man lives. Now, you need to understand that this is how Christians lived in those days, or at least they tried to live. At least that's what they believed in those days, which is scriptural, right? Okay. He said, I can't live with you because that man is your natural husband. In other words, that man was the first man that you slept with, and he's your husband, and he's alive. Even though you didn't marry him, he's alive, and therefore a second marriage is not scriptural. That was what he said to her. And that's why I'm leaving you and I'm going to Brazil. So we don't know how many years went by, a couple of years went by, and he comes back and he's been sick and he's a broken man. So this man that had these high moral standards, lots of times we have a vision of what a moral standard is, but when we're tested, we can't live up to it. See, we can have a vision of what's right because we learn it, but when we're put to the test, we cannot live up to what we know is right. So he couldn't just walk away from her and leave her like that. We don't know what happened to him in Brazil, but he came back. He had been sick, and he decided he wants his wife. So he goes looking for her, and she is living with this other man, Mr. Duberville, who again was shown in the movie. He's an insensitive man. He's not beating her, but he's insensitive to her. She's crying because she just saw her husband, and she told him to go away because she's living with the first guy. And Mr. Doolittle, he's just very insensitive to her, And she has a decent lifestyle. She has nice clothes. They're living in a nice place. Her mother and the children he's given them a house. They're not living on the street anymore. And now her husband comes back from Brazil, and he's forgotten all about his morals, that she's another man's wife, and he wants her back. So this is a true story, brethren. It's in the records, okay? So she's so distraught that she just sent her husband away, and she's living with the cousin, the first man, that according to this scriptural law was her husband, was her true husband, her natural husband. That's the way it was put in the movie. Then she kills him. She picks up a knife and she stabs him to death. And she runs after her husband, who's on a train leaving. He was going away. And she gets on the train with him, and she says to him, well, they're going to catch me, they're going to put me in jail, and they're going to hang me. And they just have a couple of days before she's caught. So they find a place to go. They consummate their marriage. They're in each other's arms, happy, loving each other. And the police come and arrest her and hang her. She was hanged. That's what it said at the end of the movie. She was hanged in such and such a place in such and such a year. So I watched this movie, and I didn't really, to be honest with you, it was just a movie that I was watching, and I really wasn't looking very deeply into it. And it was 2 days later. I didn't think much of it other than how sad. And it was 2 days later the Lord came to me. And this is what he said to me. He said, Sheila, look at it this way. He said, look at it from a strictly moral point of view. She thought it was, and I really didn't question, right? Well, obviously she shouldn't have murdered him, I was not into analysis mode. I was not. This is what the Lord said. This is what happened. Her parents sent her to the rich relative. The man was just smitten with her. Couldn't get over. Years later, still just wanted to take care of her and be with her. She did sleep with him. She did bear his child. She did not want to go to him, even though she was, according to scriptural law, she really was. He was her husband. That was his child. She would not go back to him. He was not beating her. Her life was not in danger. She would not go back to him. Okay. And she thought that it was okay to suffer like that, to make the child suffer like that. She thought it was okay to marry another man. She thought that because she didn't have a legal marriage to the first man, that the spiritual law that said he was her natural husband didn't apply to her. She thought it was okay to lie about it. She did all of these things that were wrong. After the first transgression, because she was this naive girl who was like pushed into it by her family, instead of, and it never occurred to, I want to tell you, watching this movie, it never occurred to me that she should have made the best of it and stayed with him. The thought never occurred to me. You know, in my heart, there's still a lot of women's live in me, brethren. The Lord's been changing me, but there's still a lot of women's live in me. You know, the thought never occurred to me that she should have stayed with the man. Okay. And 2 days later, the Lord comes to me and says, look at what happened to her and what she could have avoided if she would have followed a spiritual law that would probably be voted down and despised by every woman that is listening to your voice right now. That the man was the first man she slept with that made him her husband, and she should have stayed with him. The thought never occurred to me, that she should stay with someone that she really just didn't like. Look at what happened to her. She wound up being hanged. After years of suffering, the man that she married, that she was crazy in love with him, they were crazy in love with each other. What came out of that love, that they were crazy in love with each other? He broke her heart by rejecting her on their wedding night. She went from a life where she was a lady to working in the fields, to being poverty stricken again. And eventually, because of that, all that she had been through, all the grief and disappointment that she had been through, when she finally sees her husband wanting her, okay, and she knew that if she left the man that she was now living with as man and wife, if she left him, he would have gone after her. So she would have, I think that's what she was thinking. She would have never gotten away with it, either from him or from the society. You just didn't do things like that in those days. She wound up hanging. She became a criminal. And the Lord came to me 2 days later and said, Sheila, if she would have just followed natural law and stayed with the man, that he didn't rape her. He did not rape her. He was pressuring her, but he did not rape her. She agreed to it. Okay. If she would have just stayed with him, she would have not hung. She would have not been executed. She would have not been a murderer. Her child probably would have lived. Her family would not have gone through what they went through. And I was shocked. I want to tell you that I was shocked that God said that to me. But I saw the truth of it. I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm telling you that what God said to me was, if she had followed natural law and stayed with the man, the first man that she slept with, none of this other stuff would have happened. Did it go well for her? Here's the question. Did it go well for her? So she didn't like him, so she left. Did it go well for her? She was, and in the movie there are some references to her pride, So you worked in the field like a slave. They worked very hard in the field. Your child died. You found true love, and your true love abandoned you and broke your heart. And then you were living peaceably back with the first guy. You were living peaceably with him. You didn't like him. I mean, he wasn't affectionate. He wasn't affectionate. Okay, but you had a decent life. You were respected in the community. Okay, and then the man that you love desperately comes back, and you wind up killing the first man, and now you're being hanged as an utter criminal. And I looked at what the Lord was saying, and I said, if she had lived according to the moral law, if there had been someone, and again, I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm not saying right or wrong. Okay, if someone would have been there, a father, anybody would have said to her, look, you really need to stay with this man. You started with him, you did it, and you should finish with him. She would have lived a long life, had many children. Her child would have lived, and she would not go down in history as a murderess. That's what God said to me, and it blew me away. It blew me away because I see what He said. She followed the moral law. She might have had she was not happy, you see. She was really unhappy. She loved this man. He abandoned her, and she still loved him after he abandoned her on the wedding night. If she had stayed with the first man, she would have had more children. She would have had comfort in her children. Nobody's going to like this. I don't like it, but I see the truth of it, that there is natural law. There is natural law, and there's moral law. And that if you want the best possible life that you can have, you need to find the moral, natural law in everything that you do and follow after it. Even though it doesn't make sense to your natural mind, well, she really didn't like him. She'll make another start. She'll make another start. See? This is a really hard word. There is a natural law. See? And your best bet in life, of course, aside from Jesus, this movie was not about Jesus. Follow the natural law. Find out what's right and do what's right. And sometimes what's right is very hard. But in this country and in the Western world, in the Christian world, we largely live like that for a couple of centuries. Centuries. And at least the societies were stable. Look at what's happening. Look at what's happening to the Christian world now. Natural law cannot be denied. What's right is right. And when you get off of that path of natural law, you think you can still be happy when you get off of that path of natural law. But you can't. Well, Sheila, what about all the people in this country that got divorced and got married again and had kids from 2 or 3 different husbands? Well, maybe that person is happy, but what about the next generation? You got to find the path. You have to find the moral path. And Jesus will help you to do that. And your personal happiness is not the most important thing in the world. The most important thing in the world is that you follow Jesus and the natural moral law, and that you do not be someone who has contributed or participated in the ultimate destruction or overthrow of society. Because nothing good can come out of that. Jesus said sacrifice is the way to go. Sacrifice means you follow the natural moral law and you do what's right. And if there's room left for you to be happy, well, praise the Lord, that's wonderful. Wow, Sheila, you are such a party pooper, aren't you? And you're such a depressing person. Your morality is archaic, I'm just telling you what God showed me. And I confess to you that I was shocked that He said that to me. But that's what He said to me. And I can witness to you that I believe that the Lord has taught me a lesson and that I see the righteousness of it. It's not easy following a holy God. But to think that you might attain to eternal life without following the ways of a holy God is total self-deception on your part. So I have said it to you.